Hey guys, we are in 1 Corinthians 5 through 8 today, chapter 5. We jump into sin that has snuck inside the church, that when we enable people who are doing sinful things, and there's no repercussion for the wrong actions they're doing, that it just keeps someone in that sin and they can't have this turned heart. We can see that even in our kids, like when we don't have any discipline towards lying or doing something wrong, it'll just continually happen. And Paul is telling them that sin tolerated becomes sin celebrated. And that's what we see also in general in today's world, right? That we have tolerated and continually tolerated, and it went so far where we were letting kids name themselves as dogs. That's how far we went. How horrible is that? It's because the sin that was tolerated then turned into sin celebrated, and what we refuse to confront eventually grows boldness in that sin, where it just is like out flaunting it. Verse 5, the church is called to holiness, not comfort. And that line has to be held, that this wasn't out of cruelty to put him out. It was hope for restoration. That's always the goal. The goal is restoration. And you see that all throughout scripture. When God disciplines, he's disciplining to restore, to bring you back in. That's the point of it. So it's not a cruel thing. It's actually the most loving thing you can do, is to discipline your children to stand for truth. It's the most loving thing you can do. Verse 12, Paul is giving direction, but the church, he's saying, I can give you direction, but that's not my church. That's not where I'm living. So Paul is giving direction, but the church has to make this choice and hold to it. And we see this same thing. What he's talking about here is a structure for leadership. And so that's not just for the church, like this, he's talking to the church, but this can be applied to anyone in leadership. So as parents, specifically, that's your takeaway. Okay, here's what he says to the church. How can I apply it into my own life? Part of that is saying, as parents, guardians of our children, right? Of their spiritual health of our family. We're in charge of that as parents. And you see in Deuteronomy 6:6-7, right? Teach your children diligently. You have Proverbs 22:6, train them up in the way they should go. You have Ephesians 6:4, bring them up in instruction of the Lord. Joshua 24:17 says, claim your house for God. That's like all scripture is backing us, how important it is as parents to hold this same line, that we shouldn't be looking for the church to teach our children right and wrong and for someone else to maybe address them. We as leaders of our children, the ones that God entrusted to us, are supposed to direct them in the way they should go, are supposed to hold that firm line, not comfort. That shouldn't be it, right? It's holiness, not comfort, is what we should be calling them into, to turn from that. And I think some families have gotten really far from that. We need to pull back into that space. Okay, chapter 6. This is within the church he's talking about, so acting differently than unbelievers. So verse 6, or chapter 6, the first chunk of it, what I pulled from that is, it's better to just take wrong things, to just like take it and give grace and just turn the other cheek, so to speak, rather than to settle it in court. So we shouldn't be taking other believers into court, letting the world decide. We should be handling that inside the church amongst believers. We should be seeking peace and be living peaceably, and seeking reasoning and understanding, right? Verse 9-10, it's not God withholding, but we become what we practice. So he's not saying that God's going to withhold salvation or forgiveness, but simply that we become the things we practice. So if sin's kind of what we're living our life in, and saying like, oh, well, I mean, God will forgive it, guess what's going to happen? It's just going to slowly take more and more part of your life, where you are no longer free, but slaves to this sin, because we become what we're practicing. Verse 11, but we were justified by Jesus. So Jesus doesn't just forgive, guys. He transforms. That's what makes him different than other religions. He transforms. Your past no longer defines your future. So who I was actually, I feel who I was actually launched me into my future, gave me actually a footing to like understand people in their pain differently, to come and meet people where they're at, to have more grace. So we actually turn that right around and use it for good. So my past doesn't define my future, who I am. While it did happen, and it's important to realize it did happen, it's not saying to just ignore those things, because we do have to go through the layers of our trauma and our past with God, because he's the only one who can do it gently and completely heal the heart where it's not even a scar there. It's just fully restored. He's the one who can do that. So our past doesn't define our future. Verse 13 through 14, I got to keep moving here, is this. Our physical choices here are spiritual decisions. They're connected. We sometimes want to disconnect it of like, okay, what I'm choosing today. I mean, it doesn't matter really spiritually, but it does. Our physical choices are spiritual decisions, and God cares about the whole body. He cares about our body, our fleshly body, our mind, our souls, our spirit. He cares about the whole thing. Our whole makeup he cares about, every single layer of it. So we shouldn't think that he's disconnected from any of it. Verse 16, sex is deeper than babies and feelings, guys. Here it says right here that you are joined as one. Any sexual action. So if you have sex with a prostitute, you're one with the prostitute. And this one rocked me a few years back. And I had to go through asking God to break those bonds that I made without understanding that sex isn't just physical, it's spiritual. I didn't understand that side of it, that sexual sin violates something God created to reflect himself. Like it's not just this act, but I'm made in the image of God, and I'm supposed to reflect him. And so by choosing that, I was not just sinning in an outside way, as Paul's talking about, but an inward way, right? Against the very image of God. And it's, again, body and image of God. It's not just physical, but it's spiritually deep. So I had to go through breaking this, what I wasn't taught right. Like it was kind of just taught as like, sex is a sin, it's meant for marriage, don't do it. And that was it. Versus someone teaching me this layer of scripture of like, when you do that, it ties together. So remember, I want to say like a month ago, my big poll was all this chemically what happens like in a human during intercourse, because it's biological. Like it's down to that level, that it's not just scripture. It's like studies have been done and shows and proves that this chemical reaction happens, that it becomes a spiritual bond, that any single person you did. So it's not just like, oh, forgive me for that lustfulness, but breaking that bond of oneness that you made with other people, or with your spouse before you were consecrated in marriage. That's still wrong. Verse 20, this anchors, verse 20 anchors really the entire chapter of chapter 6, which actually I want to read that. Where is 20 here? For you were bought with a price. So glorify God with your body. So he wraps it up here that you belong to Jesus, that his blood declares you worthy. So those who struggle with worthiness issues, that's me. His blood declares I'm worthy. And so let my life reflect the cost that he paid. Does your life reflect the cost that Jesus paid, making you worthy? It should, right? It should. Chapter 7 now. Going into chapter 7, this one's all about marriage, which I think, again, was part of my thing that I taught like a month ago, on sexual desires and then on marriage. And Paul's hitting on it here again, that when we marry, we no longer are our own. It says in verse 4 that singleness is good, which I find interesting because it's so contradictory to this world, right? To get married, have kids, it's like the American dream, right? But guys, both marriage and singleness are God-given callings. And so like sometimes I feel that maybe he calls people into singleness, but you just feel the weight of this world to go and have something, or you think something's wrong with you because you don't have that desire. I think that sometimes I've had conversations with people who are living in a homosexual relationship of this, well, I didn't feel that calling in that space, so I kind of just figured, well, maybe it's with somebody else. And it was this enticing that the devil used, opening up a lust feeling there to trap you in a sin. You know, people who are homosexuals, who've switched to Christianity now, these conversations having with them, I'm like, wow, that's super interesting insight, right? Verse 28, I'm going to tie up into this space, even though I'm going out of order here, that those who marry will have worldly trouble. So marriage is not just this beautiful, positive thing all the time, right? There's beauty and there's hardships. Anyone married for a good length knows that there is hardships, right? That it is difficult. And that difficult, when it gets difficult, that's not failure. And sometimes we want to say like that's failure. Like divorce, which is my next point in 10, is not an option as a Christian. It's not an option. It's thrown around today as nothing, of like, well, you are intolerable. We are fighting constantly. So that just is divorce. And guys, that's not what scripture tells us at all. Verse 29, a wife is bound to her husband as long as she lives, or as long as he lives. You're bound to them. So whether you want to be free for them or not, a piece of paper doesn't make you free. You made an oath before God. You had sexual intercourse, making one in spirit. That just because it's hard, like that's not even an option. And I actually had a conversation with my husband about this, because I'm like, Paul kind of talks about it here, of a woman then can leave her husband, but if she desires to be in a relationship again, she can't be in a different relationship, but she can go back to her husband. And I'm like, so why do Christians feel the need to divorce? Why don't you just, then yeah, if it's really hard, if it's unbearable and you guys are just in these fights all the time, then just separate. Then just separate for forever if you want. But if that's your only option, you will sure learn to deal with them. You will sure learn eventually how to live again with them, because you chose to stay in that. There has been time in our marriages where, in mine and Andrew's marriage, where it's been extremely hard. There has been moments where he said that. He has said, like, maybe I just need to leave. Like, I think this is just not going to work out. In all fairness, I'm definitely a totally different person than he married. And at that time, God was kind of wedging his way in a lot of unhealthy spots in our marriage. And I was chasing after that, and he didn't sign up for that yet. And so it was really, 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 really hard. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but we both knew divorce wasn't an option. You know, like him leaving is one thing. Divorce isn't even an option, because we took that oath with God. And so that, like, nothing nullifies that, right? Nothing nullifies that. So that's, Paul's hitting on some hard topics here. Verse 14 is the next one in chapter 7 that I have written here that stood out to me, which is, oh my gosh, where is it? I should have highlighted it so I could find it faster. Here it is, but my eyes can't see it today. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, their children would be unclean. But as it is, they are holy. So what he's saying here is, because they are one, don't underestimate what God can do of pulling the spouse in, which, isn't that beautiful? That he desires to redeem, guys. That's his heart. He desires to redeem. He desires to redeem your marriage and your spouse. That's his heart. That should be our heart, right? That should be what we desire. Verse 32, unmarried only worry about pleasing the Lord, but married think about pleasing their spouse as well. And he's talking about that gift again of those who are in singleness, that it's not a bad thing, because you're fully focused on pleasing God and going where God tells you to go. But when you are married, you now have this other component, because you're one. So it's two minds having oneness. So it becomes this division almost in there, because you're not just trying to please God, but you also have this spouse that you have to be patient, pulling in or waiting for sometimes. And as a married woman, like as a woman, my leadership does fall under my husband because Christ is his head and he is my head. And so if God is calling me to do something, he's made this order that I have to say, okay, well, I hear you. And I guess I have to wait and just keep praying for my husband because I have to wait for him to jump on board. So I can see where Paul's talking about that here. If Andrew died, I would not be getting remarried ever in my life, because man, it is hard. It's really, really, really hard, guys. It's beautiful. And if that's what you're called to do, or if that's what you chose to do, God will sustain that. He'll give you strength in that, because now that God honoring is that what God joins together, no man should divide, right? And so you're honoring that. But it is hard. And I don't think we teach our kids that enough, right? I think that we went through, which I do agree with, that you shouldn't do arguments and debates in front of your kids, right? That should be behind closed doors. But I don't think you should not let them know that there's ever any struggles in a marriage. I don't think that sets them up for success, right? But instead teaching them like, yeah, there's struggles and you have to talk with each other and communicate and work through them. Like that's an important part of marriage. Relationship management, right? Okay, chapter 8, going into chapter 8 now, verse 1, knowledge puffs up and love builds up here. Knowledge gives us closed ears, right? When we think we know it all, right? And we do self-justification. So knowledge without love quickly becomes arrogance, right? But love, on the other hand, it's an open heart and it's seeking to understand. So it should come from love first, because love uses knowledge to strengthen other people, right? So you use knowledge, but it should first start with love. That's the best design, the perfect design that God's made for it. Verse 13. Be conscious of other people is what he's talking about here. He's talking about eating those sacrifices, which remember, I want to say, I think it was just earlier in Acts that he was saying, where Peter had that sheet with the animals on it, and what God has made clean, no man should make unclean, or whatever that was. You know what I'm talking about. If you've been watching these videos, you know what I'm talking about. And so here it's saying, oh, well, we know there's no other gods and those are dead, so it doesn't really matter. But Paul's also saying here, be conscious of other people, that love chooses people over our own desires. That if you have somebody around with you that doesn't do those things, that's convicted of those things, just honoring them, in what their conscience is leading them to. Because God, again, he knows the perfect next step for each person. Like we might want them to jump to, hit that in the board game there, that little rainbow that jumps to the other side. That's what we want to happen. But God's like, no, this is the next step. This is the next step, because there's important things in each of those steps. And we sometimes want to shortcut it, tell them the wisdom we know, but there might be a whole bunch of steps before that God needs to reveal to them to get their heart in the right posture to receive, and so they can apply it into their life. And so he knows the perfect order. And so Paul's here talking about, again, living peaceably. This is relationship management that he's talking about. Actually, I would say that sums up the entire reading today, is relationship management of don't let sin just be okay with sin, because then it'll create a lifestyle of sin and then it'll be celebrated and they'll become bold in it. That's a problem in a relationship, right? Address it, even if it's a hard issue. Marriage, of the oneness in marriage, relational again. What was the other one that we talked about? Sexuality, having sexual sin. Again, that's the relationship, managing that relationship and managing the relationship with Christ, right? That 1:6, how I said it was anchored in, are you living this life that's reflecting what Christ paid? Because it's a relationship. It should look like that. And then here, choosing things that are going to set other people up for success as well, right? Being sensitive to other people's convictions and their lifestyle, right? Again, I see this a lot at Laura's home, that my lifestyle is very different than theirs. And for me to feel bad and desire them to have things that I have is kind of the wrong mindset, because it could set them up for a failure, thinking that they're supposed to have and they should have these things to be happy or to look like they got it together. And that's not true. God's going to meet you always where you're at. And there's this teaching process that happens as you get more and more responsibilities, right? And Laura's home does that so well, where they have these women go through, they're not just a shelter, they are a program that the women come in and they learn how to handle finances. They don't just give them a house. That's just putting a Band-Aid on it. That's just making them think that's what they need to have success. And it's well, wait a minute. Let's teach money management first. Let's teach hygiene first. Let's teach job etiquette first, so you can understand these basic steps. So then when you have those things, you can be successful. But that's not what success is, right? And we can sometimes do that in our very comfy American lifestyle, think that that's what people need of, oh, that mom, that poor mom who couldn't give her kids 1,000 presents. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. And we sometimes think these things in our own comfort. So be conscious of other people where they're at is what Paul's talking about here. All right. That's what I have for you guys today. We'll see you tomorrow.